Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Checking in again on our Birthright series here where we're reviewing factions. We're continuing in the Western Coast, the domains of the Western Coast. And today we got an interesting one. So it's called Brosengae, and it's a smaller territory. And we'll take a look at the map here at some point in the video as well, if you're not too familiar with where it is. But it's an interesting domain in the sense that it's not overly large with only 3 provinces. And really is quite the challenge to play as. So if you're looking for like hard mode, this is it here. That being said, it does offer some interesting opportunities. It's just there's a lot of factors that do make it a little bit difficult for you, at least at the outset. But there are ways for you to um, expand, not necessarily in a territory sense. This isn't really a military power as of yet, but again, there's just some interesting opportunities, but certainly a mountain of challenges that await you. So you might be wondering there, right? It's a curious country in the sense that it is neutral evil, essentially, overall. Now, that doesn't mean like the people are evil, but this is more a reflection of the ruler, at least currently, and kind of the position that they're in here. So we have 3 provinces, and this is kind of the southwest of Annuir here. So we have Bindier, Coer, and Maryland, if I'm not mistaken. And interestingly, here at least you have, because it's also such a small nation, you do have 3 very well-developed provinces at level 4 there, with a little bit of magical potential in 2 of them. Bindier is a little bit empty in that sense, but um, there's certainly room to grow that, but it's nice in that sense, starting off with 3 decently settled provinces as far as potential there for law and guilds and so on and so forth. So speaking of which, let's take a look at that. So we have a couple of things here. We have Ariane Miralyn, which is going to be your regent. She controls some of the law in the nation. So everything in Bindier. But then Avenil, if you remember, we've been mentioning him throughout just because he's one of the 2 prime contenders for the Iron Throne here. So on the West Coast, of course, it's Borruin. Check our earlier video on him, but he's the other sort of major contender there. And again, not to draw a parallel to like the Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, but in some sense, almost more of a Borruin could almost somewhat look at as Starks versus Avenel and Lannisters, but again, we're not going to get into like any direct comparisons really there. But certainly 2 powerhouses. But Avenel does hold a lot of influence in your domain. In your other 2 provinces, he controls the majority of the law, with 3 out of the 4 available, and you do have some influence there. So that immediately will be one of your challenges, and we'll go into more detail there. On the religious side, you have 2 different religions. So you have PSN there, which stands for Peaceful Seas of Nesserier. We'll get into her at a little bit later. Run by David, or David, I'm not sure how they want that pronounced, and Tamer, David Tamer. Avenel, of course, is DA for the law, and then TOF is Saramier's Temple of Fortune, and that is run by Hide Termonier. Again, pronunciations are going to be difficult for this, just not that's not something that we're good at on this one. And with so many of the names, you're kind of having I think like a Welsh influence and other things. It's hard to remember them all as far as all the rules for pronunciation. But anyway, on the guild side, you do control all the guild activity in your nation, so it's another chance there to essentially double up on revenue. So, and that can be a source of initial strength there and allow you to sort of start dealing with some of the issues that face your realm and potentially asserting yourself a little bit more and then kind of going from there. So EM is you, of course, as we mentioned, Ariane Miralyn, and she does run the Brosen Royal Guild. So let's get into it. So if you choose to play her as the regent, instead of making up your own character, so you do get a half elf. She is a level 7 thief and a pretty solid bloodline here, although in her form here as is written, so she is neutral evil, so that would be something that would have to be part of the campaign. But again, depending on how you're playing the game, if it's every player is running a different nation, then that's fine. So certainly you could run an evil oriented domain, or at least a ruler that has that alignment. But it'd be a little bit more interesting in some ways too if you chose the route of just adventuring in the country, or if one of the PCs was in fact the regent here, the ruler, and then the other PCs might be your various lieutenants or other regents in the realm. So again, so many different ways to play Birthright that really it would never be the same campaign twice. So there's just such a wealth of ways to approach this, but that can be part of the challenge too of jumping into this setting. Anyway, so she's the Duchess of Brosengae, has sworn fealty to the Prince of Avenel, but she does keep some secrets from her liege. As she comes from a proud line of rulers and guild leaders, she has a keen eye for both politics and business and can quickly capitalize on any opportunities that come her way. And though she currently has sworn fidelity to Avan, she has opened secret negotiations with Borarine, which, if that were ever discovered, that would be very bad news on your part. Avenel would probably not hesitate in the slightest to come and basically just wipe you out, and could easily do that. And the reason you're going about these secret negotiations with Borarine is to try and be rid of Avenel's basically domination. As we can see, he basically controls most of the law in the nation here. So she seeks expediency in all things, looking for the best way to turn a profit. So if a piece of her domain is not appearing profitable, either in the short or long term, she will do her best to trim it from the kingdom. So that being said, probably would not be worth or would not be a good look for you to give up any of your provinces. You're only a three province domain here at the outset, so you can't really afford to give up things like that. So that being said, like I said, there's opportunities for expansion, and we'll talk about those as we go on here. So lieutenants. So she has a personal staff of 3 lieutenants, all guildsmen and rogues of varying levels. They are all excellent diplomats, skilled in the arts of negotiation, compromise, and espionage, but they know little about the arts of war. And that's really, if you get to that point where you do gain a little bit more independence and can even think about really raising a bit of a military force, you're going to want to cultivate some capable lieutenants that are skilled in the arts of war, so fighter types essentially, and that could be an area where other NPCs or PCs might be able to come into the picture, depending on how we're again approaching this as a campaign. That being said, unfortunately, this is one of these sort of shorter domain descriptions, just because it, not to say that it isn't important, but some of the other larger, more easily played domains do get a little bit more attention, sort of the double page layout. So in that sense, we're not given as much information as we could be here, but that being said as well, we could, that's sort of fertile ground for you and your DM to sort of come up with backgrounds on these 3 lieutenants and what their skill levels are and things like that. So, on the provinces side, the royal court in Bindir is one of the most impressive along the western coast, rivals even that of Borarine. Many Anuiran realms keep a permanent embassy in the capital, also called Bindir, making it a hotbed of intrigue and diplomacy. Of course, little discussion of much import occurs in Brosengae's negotiations, but the diplomats do their best to keep their lucrative postings to her court. So that is an opportunity there where you can start, once you gain a little bit more influence and maybe a little bit of independence, however you can manage that, you can start using that to your favor to make your realm an area where actual real negotiations happen, and that might be a way for you to sort of balance the 2 opposing forces of Borarine and Avenel to where you can almost maybe even gain a little bit more neutrality in some way, with the sort of expectation that you're, at least on the public level, this sort of center for negotiations and other important dealings, so that you can at least avoid sort of the polarity between the 2 sort of military powerhouses there. That being said, of course, at some point you might want to again pursue a little bit more of a military tact and expanding at one of your neighbor's expenses. We'll get to that in a bit. Or you really could just go all in on the politics, the intrigue, and then the guild activity to just sort of expand your empire there, because there's of course more than one way to expand and dominate your neighbors. So being able to control their economies and then turning that against them is a very easy way to increase your influence and sort of decrease theirs and really destabilize theirs potentially to the point where, you could sort of try to debt trap some of your neighbors into giving up territory and things like that. So, but that's again a sort of very advanced level intrigues and shenanigans. Other important NPCs. So Avenil's significant law holdings in both Maryland and Corey allow him to control the majority of law in those two provinces. Miralyn completely dominates the guild activity of her kingdom, and she tries to keep temple activity to a minimum. Still, the two temples have developed holdings here. Again, Saramie's Temple of Fortune and the Peaceful Seas of Nasirier find popularity among the people of the domain. So, nothing really else mentioned there. Neither of these are very warlike or militant faiths, so you don't have to worry about any religious conflict there. You might find some ways to maybe put a little bit of tax on the churches there if you do feel like you need to generate additional revenue. But that's probably one thing that's probably best left alone for the moment, at least. You don't need to stir up any additional trouble or conflict there. But again, in conflict, there's opportunity. So it just depends. And you got to be, of course, cognizant of what your DM might have in store for you on top of just the more obvious challenges. Now, if you note, though, there's no sources in this nation. There could be some developed. Certainly, Corey and Maryland do have some potential there. Bindier to a small extent, but that's again an area where you might look to find yourself a lieutenant who is also a wizard to start bringing that into play as well. So all the provinces in Brosengae are well settled throughout, though none of them can rival the province of Anawir and Avenil for sheer population. The land not dominated by farms is covered in woods, and the woodcutters of Brosengae constantly ply their trades in the pine forest. Of all the western realms, it does most keenly feel the storms that plague the coastal region. So, since here the trade winds from Mira Ruan meet those off of the Arnian Bay and the Straits of Aral, scarcely a day goes by without a storm of some sort. So, whether a slight drizzle or a full-fledged hurricane, it's always raining. So, something to keep in mind there for adventuring purposes as well. The two northern provinces fall prey to the trolls roaming down from the Sea Mist Mountains. The Duchess has to devote a garrison of troops to the provinces of Maryland and Corey to protect her people from the creatures' depredations. She taxes the populace heavily, calling them contributions to the cost of their own protection. So that could be a potential issue, though. You can only heavily tax people so much, and they're not necessarily going to put up with that for too long. So you might have to deal with not necessarily outright rebellions initially, depending on what's going on, but certainly it's not necessarily doing anything to endear the people to you either. So that might be something to, at least on the sort of public side, play up a little bit more and maybe find other ways to reduce taxes or a little bit, or, demand that Avenil maybe help you out a little bit there too, in return for your loyalty to him, at least initially. But that could also be a way to start driving a wedge into Avenil and maybe playing up Borroween as a potential protector, where, if Avenil's going to dominate so much of the law in your country and he's not necessarily contributing to the protection of the people, you could find that as a wedge to turn him away and potentially bring in Borroween there. But you don't want to necessarily see your nation as an actual area of conflict between the two, because that really won't benefit you or the populace. But that being said, you might want to be careful of trading one master that dominates part of your country for another, because you can imagine Borroween would probably want some sort of similar setup to Avenil. That might not necessarily advance your cause all that much. So you might try to tread carefully there and find other ways of going about that. Anyway. The citizenry, especially in the north, seem surly at the best of times. Folks labor under heavy taxes and see precious little return for their hard work, except the fattening of their monarch's pockets. Rebellion seethes just beneath the placid surface. Fear of revolt causes her to worry more about her security, which makes the people even edgier. So again, that's going to be sort of one of your most immediate problems, aside from Avenil's influence, is you need to find a way to potentially reduce taxes and show the people that you're at least in some way working for them. So finding a way to maybe deal with the troll or monster problem initially would probably be a good look for there. And then, finding a way to somehow maintain a protection force without, again, necessarily increasing the taxes. So it might be a little bit of a reversal from, the way things are written here, but just would be a common sense thing here. Again, with Avenel's influence, you don't know how he would view an actual open rebellion, and with you not having necessarily the initial standing forces, and this not necessarily capable lieutenants who are skilled at warfare or anything, you could very easily create the wrong response to that situation if it does ever erupt. And really, all it would take is maybe just a one wrong spark here to sort of set that off. So, depending on what your DM throws at you, or potentially your neighbors, depending on how this campaign is set up, you could be looking at something like those trolls or whatever, burning a few villages, or killing everybody in a village or something like that, and then that could certainly set some of your populace off. So definitely worth being careful there. And then lastly here, occasionally the Duchess attempts to restore the people's loyalty to her by sponsoring celebrations or festivals, but unknown agents keep pointing out in public that these are blatant attempts on her part to buy the favor of the populace. She suspects the source has ties to Avan, but she can prove nothing. So besides, the populace has acted the same throughout her family's reign, so she feels helpless to do anything about it. So again, that is going to be your first and foremost issue here, is just figuring out the culprits behind that. And again, it could be Avan, could be Borrowing, which is maybe him trying to then paint it as Avan to get you to sort of switch camps, but could also be sort of some of the background machinations of Rove Manslayer, who we'll be covering in our next video. So you have that sort of immediate threat of rebellion sort of right below the surface, and your at least initial efforts of sort of buying people's affections is certainly not working. So you're going to have to find other more concrete ways of doing that, and find a way, I think, to sort of set your influence a little bit more versus Avenel. You don't want to, I think, initially provoke any outright hostilities. You have nothing in the way of military power that would stand up to him. And even though it doesn't say anything here, you might, depending on those protection forces, that'd be something to work out with the DM. Essentially, what sort of like probably like a two unit army that you do actually have. So whether it's like scouts or regulars or something like that, that would be worth starting. But again, that wouldn't even be a speed bump for Avenel if you were to piss him off too much. So it's a tricky situation. But to stabilize that, you certainly have the economic might. And this might just be an area where, rather than hoarding money and power like that, it would probably do well for you to spend some of that capital initially to get the populace on your side and work at sort of, again, not sort of outright hostility with Avenel. That's a bad plan, but finding a way to increase your influence. So that could be, in game terms, raising the levels of the other two provinces up a little bit, so like Corey and Maryland to 5, and then working on getting a law holding in there, just to sort of increase the percentage of your law holding versus Avenel. And then finding perhaps some sort of negotiation tactic to essentially get him to lower some of his influence, but offer him something in return there. But again, it's going to be a long, tricky path to sort of disentangle yourself with Avenel without sort of facing literal annihilation at the hands of his army. But that could be an area where you maybe try to play Burrowing off of him when the time is right. So if Avenel were to threaten to invade, having Borrowing's army show up on your doorstep to ruin Avenel's plans there. Now, whether a real battle ensues between the two, that could work out in your favor too. They'd both weaken themselves, certainly, depending on what kind of appetite they have for a full-on conflict, which could erupt certainly into a wider war. So there's just so many different avenues that this can take, and that's kind of what makes this a fun realm to try and play. Again, this isn't an easy one by any means. You don't have a very large territory. You have a lot of internal problems and sort of varying sort of external existential crises in the terms of being situated between the two powerhouses. So let's take a quick look back as we kind of wrap up here, just to again take a look at where this is on the map. So Borrowing is up here. That's that large power. Rove is again kind of right in the middle, and then Avenel is literally on your doorstep. So you do have a nation between you two, Tagus, and that could be one where, depending on how your fortunes go, you might try to expand into initially. You really have no hope of dealing with Diomed, Diomed and or Avenel, in the short or even really near term. Maybe long term, if you can build your power up, that could be something to pursue if you wanted to have more ally with Borrowing, I think. But it's really, at the outset, unrealistic for you to think about any sort of really military expansionism. So again, you just have these three little provinces down here. You might, in an effort to also, depending on what happens with Avenel, sort of protect yourself more because of the mountain ranges here. You might try to, and this would be something to work out with a DM, sort of block off the passages a little bit more, build some fortifications. But again, Avenel will probably interpret that in a way as hostility against you, so you got to be very careful there. But again, that could be where some help from Borrowing comes into play, or again playing that goal of sort of independence and neutrality from both of them, at least on the surface, and using your domain as one that is known for negotiations and forging treaties and various things like that. And again, on the economic side, because you do have so much coastline, so it would be really worth delving into building up trade routes, and that's something as the leader of the guilds that you can certainly benefit from as well. So definitely worth forging those. And again, I think through economy, that could be an area where you can then gain more independence. So and in that sense too, you might look at building up sort of the influence of your guild into some of your neighbors, and then if they do get a little bit too threatening, finding ways to use your economic influence to destabilize them a little bit, but of course anonymously, so that you don't draw ire towards yourself. But anyway, like I said, Brosengae is a really fun one. Often overlooked. Went a little too far here. Often overlooked, but again, this is one that could be a really interesting story and a really interesting challenge for an experienced player. I would not recommend this for a beginning player by any means. I think there's just too many ways to go wrong, and not enough in the way to sort of help you recover from mistakes. So hope you guys enjoyed that. I know we went a little bit long on this one despite how small the country is, but I feel like a little bit extra explanation there was worthwhile for you guys. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think of our review and the series here, and if you could, a like and a subscribe as well if you haven't already. We really do appreciate you guys stopping by, and we will see you in the next one. Take care.